Hello, all the students of 11th standard. So, today we will start with English, our first chapter, The Portrait of a Lady, which is written by Kushwant Singh. So, the author of our chapter is Kushwant Singh, and let me show you. I have some images of Kushwant Singh. So, this is our author, and now let us proceed. The Portrait of a Lady. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and even had a husband. But that was hard to believe. My grandmother's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like fables of the prophets she used to tell us. So, in this paragraph, the author has described about his grandmother. Whenever the author had seen his grandmother, she was quite old, wrinkled. Wrinkles had arrived because of her age, and he have heard people saying that when she was young, she was quite pretty, and he also describes about his grandfather's portrait that was hung in the drawing room, and the grandfather for him looked like he was very old, almost 100 years old, and he must be having grandchildren and not children, according to author. Uh, the author feels by looking at the portrait of the grandfather. So now let us move ahead. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. So there were many wrinkles on the face of his grandmother. She was short in height and also fat and little bit bent, maybe because of her age. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her, old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and stayed at the same age for 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hopped about the houses in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop, and other telling the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moving in inaudible prayer. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure beauty with serenity, breathing peace and contentment. The author has described about the about his grandmother. He describes about the wrinkles, about the age of the grandmother, about how she was short, old, and little bit stooped. She was little bit bent. She was also fat. Everything. But the author feels that his grandmother was very beautiful. Despite of having all the wrinkles and pale, puckered face, yet she was very beautiful. The author has said that she was like the winter landscape in the mountains. Everything is white when it is winter in the mountains. So, uh, the author has described his grandmother. Now, moving ahead to the next paragraph. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for the school. She said her morning prayer in the monotonous song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in the bundle, and hand it to me. After a breakfast of a thick stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to the school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. So now, uh, the the grandmother and the author were good friends, and they loved each other. The author's parents had moved on to the town, you can say in a new city, and at that time they had left the author with his grandmother. So the routine of their life is discussed over here. She used to wake him, get him ready for the school, and while dressing him up and bathing him, she used to recite some prayers, and she wanted that he learned it by heart. And she would offer him the breakfast, the wooden slate, the chalk, and uh, and take him to the school. My grandmother always went to school with me because school was attached to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda, singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time, the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. So, his grandmother would accompany him to the school, and the school was attached um with the temple. So the priest used to teach all the students about the alphabets, and he would make all of them recite the prayer in chorus, and his grandmother would meanwhile read the scriptures. And when they used to go to their home, at that time, they would give the chapatis to the dogs, and they would him, follow them. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room. My grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the street, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. So now the parents were settled in the city, so they uh, So they called the author and the grandmother to stay with them in the city house. So now there was a turning point in the friendship of the author and the grandmother. So now the author studied in the English school and the grandmother used to stay at home and she used to feed the sparrows. We will end for today. Thank you.